Hello and welcome to FranklinCovey on Leadership. I'm your host, Will Hodeling, FranklinCovey's head of product. In these conversations, we'll talk with many of the world's most successful leaders about the mistakes, mindsets, and methods that made them the people they are today. We hope that their hard-earned insights help you accelerate on your journey. Today's guest is Cyan Banister, one of the world's most successful venture investors. She invested in great companies like SpaceX, Uber, Affirm, Niantic, Flexport, and more. She was the first female partner at Founders Fund, and now she is the co-founder of her own venture capital fund, Long Journey Ventures, where they invest in the magically weird. Amazingly, Cyan did all of this with a very non-traditional background. She grew up on a Navajo reservation, dropped out of high school, and experienced homelessness in her teens. From that experience, she grew and developed into becoming the successful leader, investor, and human that she is today. Today's far-ranging conversation touches on her background, the mindsets, both personal and professional, that made her successful, and the experiences and lessons learned along the way. We really hope you enjoy the conversation and enjoy Cyan's incredible wisdom. Cyan Banister, welcome to FranklinCovey on Leadership.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. I'm incredibly excited for today's conversation as well. I've been a long-time admirer of your opinions and insights, of your background and experience, obviously of your investor track record, but almost more than all of that, of your personal journey and the kind of mindsets you bring to the world. I've read that when you meet with founders, the first question you ask is, tell me about yourself, tell me your personal story, tell me where you come from. And that helps you understand their motivations, drives, their purpose and values. And so I want to start similarly with you. I would love to hear your personal story to begin and kind of how that led to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Arizona, born and raised, and my formative years were on the Navajo reservation. And by the time I was 14 years old, I was homeless. I experienced a bout of homelessness. On and off the streets. I had to leave high school early, so I do not have a high school diploma. I did not go to college. And while all of my friends and colleagues were going to university, I was working a 9-to-5 job. And so I got started rather early working, and I worked in food service industry, I worked in retail, I worked in telemarketing, I worked in construction, I think I counted at one point 50 some odd jobs before I landed on technology. And you have to do that sometimes when you're a low wage or minimum wage worker. Often you'll start someplace and move until I like to say that I was upskilling. So a lot of what I would do is stay at a place until I could learn enough skills and then move on to the next one until I could learn enough skills. And if there wasn't a path to management or a path, past the job that I had, I would often leave and go someplace else. And then that accumulated knowledge was really, really valuable. So one of the things I like to teach people about is the process of sort of incremental learning and incremental leveling up. There's a lot of misconception out there that you just go from 0 to 1. And, that I and many other people are an overnight success, but that's not true. It's actually a daily practice. And I developed this practice when I was younger, that every single day that I woke up, I would have to run an experiment for the day, and I would have to learn one new thing. And that could be, how does the cash register work? It could be, when I worked at Fur's cafeteria, I was very, very curious about, how the supplies for the food got into the restaurant, how do you make margins work? What are margins? And I would go around and ask these questions wherever I went, because the world is a beautiful place and it's a school and everything can be learned if you're curious enough. And so from that point, I actually landed my first tech job because a group of friends of mine encouraged me to pursue this field. And they said, Cyan, you're capable of, getting into the technology world. And I didn't think I was. I thought I had to have accreditation. I thought, I wasn't intelligent enough. I had all of these stories that I told myself, because often we can be our own worst enemy, right? Mm-hmm. And so I got a job working at a dial-up tech support company. And how I got this job was my friends would role play with me at night, and I would call them, or they would call me, and we would pretend to be on the other side. And they coached me through how to answer probably the top 10 problems that someone would have when they were trying to dial up and could not. And so I interviewed for a job and got the job. And from there, applied my gaming theory of everyday level up, and eventually read a book that changed my life. My boss came and threw a book on my lap and said, you should stop wasting your time. At the time I was registering free domains. I probably could have made a lot of money, but I didn't. And he threw a book in my lap, and it was called The Essential Guide to System Administration by O'Reilly. And that book completely changed my trajectory. So I didn't read it for a long time. I let it collect dust on my desk, and then eventually one day cracked it open, and my whole world changed. And from that point forward, I realized I had to be in Silicon Valley. So I threw everything in my car and drove west, and eventually landed in San Francisco. And a bunch of my friends said, all your dreams will come true on Craigslist. Just go there and look for a job, look for an apartment. And so I did that. And I worked at startup after startup after startup, and eventually landed on one that was acquired. So a lot of the times when you work at startups, 9 out of 10 startups fail. So if you join a startup, it's very likely that it's going to fail. And so if you join a startup, I think you've got to treat it kind of like going to business school or going to a university. It's a chance to learn and possibly a chance to win the lottery. But not always. And so I got very, very lucky. I landed at a job that was an extraordinary place to work, with the best leader I've ever met in my life. And I learned so much about myself there, but ultimately I learned that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I left, I started my own company, and I failed as an entrepreneur. But what it taught me was how to be a good investor. And I started learning about what tools, development tools, business tools that businesses needed that they didn't have. And so I started investing in those two categories as well as marketplaces, because I started thinking to myself, what would have the younger Cyan wanted or needed to succeed in this world? And I'm going to invest in those things. And that served me very well. So, early investments in Uber and Postmates and Thumbtack, to name a few. And my thesis behind them at that time was, if a young Cyan could get on a bicycle and deliver a sandwich, would that change her life? Absolutely. If I had a car and this asset sitting in my driveway, if I could just get in it and drive people around, could I make a meaningful income? And so that's kind of how I got to where I am, and I'm so passionate about it. It's what I do to this day. And one of the reasons why I love it so much is I love to sit in front of an entrepreneur who's dreaming about the future and paints this beautiful future for me that could be possible, and all they need is a little bit of fuel for their fire, and that's my job.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. It's such an impressive trajectory. And you spoke about, in talking about your trajectory, the one mindset, incrementalism, that really guided you in your journey of leveling up every single day. I want to, for the next few minutes or so, work through a thought experiment of Cyan University. And that, as you said, you dropped out of high school, you didn't go to college, and yet you've been tremendously successful personally and professionally. You've obviously learned and incorporated powerful mindsets along the way. And at FranklinCovey, we're all focused on teaching people powerful mindsets and paradigms. So incrementalism is clearly one mindset. What would be another mindset that you would teach in the kind of freshman year curriculum of Cyan University?
Optimism. I think it takes courage to be an optimist. And because when you stand in the face of so much pessimism, there's an ocean of pessimism out there. It's easier to be a pessimist. It's easier to say that something won't work because you've got really nothing to lose. But you have everything to lose when you're an optimist. And because it takes this joy and this, it's kind of like reckless abandon to be an optimist. Like, you have to believe in the impossible. You have to believe that something that you can only see could be true. And so I think, obviously you need to measure things and make sure that, you're not overly optimistic. There's people that are default happy, default optimistic, and, that's great. But I think just a general sense of optimism about yourself and your life and your trajectory, because I do believe that whatever perception you have of the world and of yourself shapes your reality. So if you step out the door every day with a negative attitude, you're going to just have a lot of negativity, and you're not going to have the kinds of results that you would have if you looked at the world with wonder and optimism. So I would teach people how to find the wonder in the world. It's everywhere. And the possibilities in the world, as well as how to find their inner true selves. I think a lot of people are not authentic and are afraid to be so, and are basically cosplaying or putting on masks for others. And I think it would be a lot better, I know it would be a lot better if we would all just be ourselves. So and on top of that is that success is not overnight, and you can measure your success every day in tinier little increments, and that way you can win every day. So, reshaping your framework around what success means, I think.
I want to dive deeper on your comment around optimism, and kind of you made something I think to the effect of happiness is a choice or optimism is a choice. How do you cultivate that wonder and curiosity? How do you cultivate that optimism? It's, for many people, it's not natural. They wake up and they're down, or they're sad, or they're anxious, or whatever the case may be. How do you cultivate that very positive mindset?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to try not to identify with those things. You may be sad, but it's transient. Happiness and joy is definitely a choice. I think when you start to feel that way, you can say like, hey, like for example, let's say that you have an impending deadline, and you're dreading it. It's coming up. You've got to get things done. You're procrastinating. But instead, what if you looked at it as a joyful thing in which what could go wrong? And you really, really start to, that's one of the things I always ask myself is what could go wrong? And have a realistic expectation of that. And then once you realize like, well, it's not the end of the world. The worst case scenario is not that bad. Then you can go into it with optimism and start thinking about it differently, because we're often our own worst enemy. And our ego gets in the way of our higher purpose and our first thought. And so I just think that the biggest thing is really, really question yourself every day and run experiments every day and question your frameworks and just say, like, if I reframe this thought, how could I step through the door out into the world differently today? And don't assume that your personality is fixed. It's not. All personalities can be changed. All routines can be changed. Even if it seems impossible, you can change it. And so I think just what harm is there in just a tiny little, if you just added a spoonful of optimism to your day, more than you already have, what will that do for you?
Yeah. I recently read that you tweeted that you love aphorisms.
Yes.
And that you wish there was an aphorism club, and that you read a lot of aphorisms. What are one or two aphorisms that are on your mind right now?
Well, one that sticks with me always, that I love more than any of them, is enlightenment resides between the space between thoughts. So if you think about that, it's enlightenment is not a thought, it's a feeling, it's a knowing that exists without words. So for example, when you have a baby, unless you have some sort of mental dysfunction, which happens, but you look at that baby, you feel love like you've never felt in your life, and you can't put that into words, not really. There's words fail us for that feeling. But you know the responsibility, you know what that person means, and there's just so much that just can't be put into words. You just know it. And I feel like the truth is something that can be spoken without words. And so the second aphorism I really like is the truth is not written or spoken in words, it must be evoked. And those two aphorisms stick with me, and I think about them every day. And so I read probably about 15 to 20 a day. I usually fixate on about one at a time and really think deeply about them. I think they're so cool because they punch above their weight and they have this feeling or gravity to them. They're so succinct, and and I started writing some of them. And so it's fun to try them out and then like send them to people and see what they think of it. But yeah, if you ever have an aphorism if anybody's listening that has an aphorism they'd like to send me, I'm always game. I love them, and I really would like for someone to start a club.
Would you be comfortable sharing some of the aphorisms that you've written?
Yeah, absolutely. This one's not really an aphorism, but I really like it. It's funny. Sometimes you don't know what will stick on a stick. That one just really. How can one believe if they do not have the right How can one believe if they do not have the right prescriptive perception to see? So that one I really, really like.
Importance of your viewpoint in perspective. I like that.
Yeah, play can reveal the truth faster than serious ever can. I can go into that one in more deep detail.
Yeah, I would love that.
Truth often arrives in fragments, not as a whole. In friendship, math is strange. 1 + 1 is a widening circle. Love that isn't measured cannot be miscounted. So those are a few.
I love those. Thank you.
Yeah. So I don't know if you want me to go deeper on where I was.
Maybe.
I'm also thinking about something and trying to figure out, like, nothing is better than something, because a lot of people say something is better than nothing. And so I try to like flip also things around that are truisms that people say, and then try to reverse them to see if actually nothing can be much better than something.
Do you want to choose one of those that you've written and kind of tell us the backstory?
Is there one that was your favorite by any chance?
I like the one about play.
Play, yes. So a lot of the times when you are trying to solve a problem, a lot of the times we keep throwing the same sort of attitude towards it, which is seriousness. And it's like, I'm going to keep being serious. I'm going to keep being serious. And if that doesn't get you what you want, why aren't you trying playful? It's really interesting how we forget to be children. And a lot of creativity and a lot of solutions come out of this space of reckless abandon and play and what other people would call foolishness. But I actually think that if we played more, you could learn more about the world. And you could also solve more problems. Like, for example, when you're in a situation with someone that's tense, and you keep trying serious, like, why not try playful? And see what happens. And I think what you'll discover is that default playful is probably the right way to go. So a lot of my friends and colleagues will describe me as very playful, very childlike. And I try to protect that part of myself and keep it alive, because I think a lot of my success comes from childlike wonder. And so that's why that aphorism was important to me that day.
It's been fascinating to hear about these kind of more personal leaning aphorisms and the personal leaning mindsets. I would love to, let's say Cyan launches an MBA focused on venture investing. And there's also mindsets about how to make great investments. So I'd love to maybe hear from what you learn from some of your best investments and what mindsets you think those can generalize for investing broadly. So I know SpaceX was your first angel investment. You made it after you had received some money for the Ironport acquisition by Cisco. And it was a very kind of bold move on your part at the time. I think SpaceX's rockets were blowing up all over the place. It was not the foregone conclusion and very successful company it is today. So what mindset did you learn? What led you to make that investment, and what mindset did you take away from it?
For that one, it's conviction. I could summarize that as conviction. I knew Luke Nosek, who is on the board of SpaceX, and he's a dear family friend. But he came over to our house, and the amount of passion that he showed, and he was jumping up and down. He's a very expressive person anyway, but he was extra expressive when he came over. And he talked about sort of the existential threat to the company if people didn't step forward and fund it. You know, SpaceX now looks obvious, but at the time was very non-obvious. And it took some pretty brave people to step up and back Elon, because the narrative at the time is nobody besides NASA has any business doing what he wants to do. But at the time, we also didn't have all the launch capabilities that we needed in order to become, you know, a space traveling, you know, world, as well as to be able to understand beyond Earth in any meaningful way. And so not only that, but just even how to get payloads to space. They just did not have the capabilities to do those things. And then reusable rockets was something that people didn't think was possible at all. And so I think that, to me, that taught me what real conviction looks like and how to find it. You know, once I saw it, once you see anything, you can kind of form a little bit of pattern recognition. And so I think what makes me good at what I do is within the first 10 to 15 minutes of any pitch, I do ask that question, which is, what is your origination story? Like, how did you get here? You're very smart. You could clearly do anything in the world you want to do, but you chose this. And often what I'll find is somebody's been thinking about this problem since they were 6 years old. You know, it's not a new problem. It could be that something came along and a technology is now available that wasn't available before. And that we're seeing that with AI, that all these people had dreams for most of their lives, and suddenly they're given tools to where they can vibe code, or they can, you know, make things that they could never make in the past. But what I'm looking for more than anything is this humanity in the person, this, you know, higher calling and purpose that they're trying to achieve, and how they're going to reshape the world as we know it. Because I'm looking for people who want to make a dent.
I think your most successful angel investment was in Uber. Maybe similarly, what lesson did you learn from investing in Uber?
Yeah, so Uber goes back to my thesis of, you know, what would a younger Cyan need in order to survive in the world? And, you know, the idea that you could take a car or any kind of asset that was just sitting in your driveway and turn it into a meaningful source of income, as well as the flexibility, was the most important piece. I really thought about the taxi industry and the medallion industry, and kind of like how much of a protective racket it was, and how it wasn't available. I always like looking for things like that too, where there's only a select few that have access, and try to break it apart so that it can be, you know, accessed by all, or as many people as possible. And what I saw was Travis Kalanick, the conviction that he had as a leader, actually, because at the time when I met him, he wasn't even talking about Uber. It was more, this person is driven and is a good leader, and I watched him, wherever he went, he had command of a room. You know, everyone paid attention. If he was talking about a donut, everybody paid attention. And so the other thing is, he was a little bit aggressive. And I think if you're going to fight regulators, you have to have the right personality for the problem. So that's the other thing I look for, is, does this person have the right demeanor to go into the battle they're about to fight? And if not, then most likely it's not going to work, you know, because they can't rally their troops, so to speak, to get behind them in this battle. And so for Uber, for me, it was, one checkbox was, you know, is this going to change the world and reshape humanity? Yes. Is he the right leader to take on the battle of his life? Yes. It's a very difficult problem. As you saw, they had to go in to municipality, to state levels, to rechange laws. Like, you know, they had to completely change the landscape of the world. It was one of the most difficult companies to build. And it really, really takes the right person, and Travis was just the right person. And so for me, that was the click that basically said, I need to invest right now.
You've had many tremendously successful investments. Nobody bats 100% though. What about an investment that either you made and it didn't work out, or an investment that you decided and passed on and was successful, and what mindset or lesson have you learned from that?
I'm always sad about passing on Udemy. They came to my office when I was running my own company and pitched to me, and I was just so passionate about it, but I got talked out of it. And that actually changed my relationship with my husband and our investing, because that was the first sort of, he said no and I said yes, and then we lost as a team. And so after that, he said, no longer will I say no. If you want to say yes, you just go. And so it completely changed our relationship of how we angel invested, was that deal. And maybe my husband's a very wise teacher. I consider him my greatest teacher and mentor. And, once he saw that I was picking winners that he was passing on, he was just like, well, she's graduated.
The student becomes the master.
Yeah, and I actually did the same to him once, which was a company that became Yammer. It was called Genie, and it was David Sachs's company. And I should have backed it just because it's David Sachs. I mean, it was silly. I was so caught up in Genie and my own personal relationship to, basically the idea behind Genie, it doesn't exist anymore, was that your family tree could start meeting each other. So basically it's like Ancestry becomes a social network.
Wow.
And it was a nightmare. I was like, I don't want my family talking to each other. I'm like, no, that's the last thing I need. And nobody needs that. It's going to create so much drama. But then it ended up turning into Yammer and pivoted. And that's the other thing, is a really good founder sometimes doesn't find product market fit right away. And what they'll do is they'll pivot and it becomes something entirely different. And then afterwards you're like, why didn't I just back the founder? And that should be the answer every time, back the founder. The idea is important, but it's not as important as the person at the helm. And then a company that I invested in that failed, that makes me sad constantly, is Pop Shop Live. Pop Shop Live, its biggest competitor is Whatnot. And Pop Shop's still around, but it ultimately didn't succeed at a venture scale, or it hasn't yet. And it's sold, and I have no interest in it anymore. And so that's the other thing, is sometimes companies will sell, and then years later you'll see that they've done incredibly well, but you have no economics in it. And, and you get all this credit for it, and you're like, I haven't been in that deal for a long time. But those would be probably the three that I would highlight as being mistakes that, and even I don't even think Pop Shop is a mistake. I think that my thesis at the time was I wanted to take a very different approach than Whatnot, but Whatnot is the clear winner.
Mm-hmm. Why is it? Why did Whatnot win and Pop Shop didn't?
I think maniacal focus on, they went after the collectible marketplace and went after trading cards and coins, and I wanted to go after more of sort of the boutique ma and pa stores, and address more of a female market. And I do think that Whatnot still isn't quite addressing the female market, and there remains a space there that's open for makeup, for crafts and art and fan collectibles and sci-fi stuff that women are more attracted to. But we'll see. I think Whatnot has definitely broken into that category, and I didn't expect them to. So they just went from a different angle.
Interesting. After your very successful angel investing career, you joined Founders Fund as the first female partner. You were there for many years, then you left to start your own venture capital fund, Long Journey, where you're kind of going back more into seed stage investing. And at Long Journey, you focus on investing in the magically weird. There's a fine line between crazy and crazy smart. So how do you determine what's magically weird and what's just too weird? How do you balance that kind of investment thesis?
Sometimes you're going to accidentally invest in too weird. It's just going to happen. But I think that that's important that you do. One, it's great to take a shot at something that's a moonshot. It may work. A lot of the times I like being the person that other VCs and other investors call when they get a deal that doesn't quite make sense to them. They're like, this is really weird. Everyone else is sending me AI infrastructure stuff and AI this and AI that, but then there's this really weird thing that pops up, and they're like, I don't know how to evaluate this. Could you look at it? That's the call I like to get. And so we invest in magically weird ideas or magically weird founders, or both. And so you could take a really boring concept, like I like to use Notarize, which is a company I invested in at Founders Fund. Pat Kinzel. He wakes up every day and thinks about how to make a notary's life better and how to make people who need to get things notarized better. And so he came up with the idea of doing notarization online. And in order to do that, he actually had to legalize it first. And so you got to think about how crazy this is. So he basically legalized it in one state and then realized that, okay, if you can legalize it in one state, then it's okay across all borders of all states. And then what he also helped legalize was electronic wills. A lot of people could not actually do electronic wills at that time, but he helped pave the path for that. And so he created even a whole other category of businesses that could flourish because of it. And so I think that it takes a unique personality to wake up every morning and just be like, I want to go fight the most boring thing possible. And in that sense, it's kind of a moat, right? It's protected. So if you find something that no one else seems to know is a problem, like people are still doing something on paper or in spreadsheets that could be automated, if you have a wild personality where you wake up with a smile every day and you're deeply passionate about the most boring problem in the world, I want to meet you, because that means that you're weird. You're really weird. And then the other thing is maybe you've stumbled across something frontier in biotech or deep tech or some interesting consumer behavior that you have uncovered that no one else has. It kind of takes some out there thinking to even come up with that idea. And so you're naturally going to be strange. So yes, we do invest in things that are too absurd and stay absurd. But sometimes the most consensus things down the road started out really, really weird. Like if you think about Airbnb, a stranger is going to sleep in your house or on your couch. Like everybody said no. And then I always like to point out Pokemon. So I invested in Pokémon Go. And when I tried to convince everybody to invest alongside me, I couldn't get anyone to. They were like, people are going to go around and collect invisible creatures. Are you mad? And I was like, no, you don't understand. Augmented reality is coming. And I tried to paint this picture for everyone of spatial computing. And still to this day, we're not quite in a spatially computing landscape yet, but it's coming. And so Pokemon Go was an interesting one because it just showed me how much people can't imagine how the world will be. And if anything, I think because of my playful nature, I almost like make-believe. And if you can imagine things in a world being differently, a lot of these founders have that capability too, and they're able to paint that picture for you of where the world is going and how it's going. So, yeah.
What's an idea that you've either recently invested in or that you're itching to invest in now that hasn't come across your plate that you think is magically weird, but the time has not quite come yet?
There's a company I invested in called Dream Park, which I'm really excited about. It's Nolan Bushnell, who created Atari, has many sons who are in the gaming industry, and one of them is one of his sons is named Brent Bushnell. And I backed his last company, which is 2-Bit Circus, and I think he sold that. And it wasn't a huge successful story, but it doesn't matter because it laid the foundation for an idea that could be much bigger, which is basically a franchise model, and he builds theme parks in parks all across the world that a person, all they need is VR headsets. So if you have VR headsets, you can create kind of like a Super Mario Brothers thing where you're walking around in a park and you're just like punching for coins. And when I was demoing it, it was really funny. We did it at Yerba Buena Gardens, and I was running around and walking in lava and punching coins, and tourists were coming up to me and they're like, what are you doing? And so a lot of the times when I'm testing a product, I'll go out in the wild, or I'll use it for 2 weeks, or I'll become a seller on Pop Shop. I immerse myself in whatever it is you tell me you're doing to see if there actually is a there. And the amount of strangers that came up to me led me to believe that everybody wanted to try this. And so I would give strangers the headset. I'm like, try it. And I would watch them walk around, and they would walk out of it laughing. And they're like, this is magical. And I'm like, it is, isn't it? It's magical. So there's an example of something that is a bit of a long shot, right? Like, you have to believe that there's enough operators out there that want to run this as a business. You have to believe that people will try it multiple times and bring their friends. there's a lot that you have to believe. You have to believe that IP providers will come in, Hello Kitty, Star Wars, etc., and create experiences for it. But if you look at Sandbox VR and you look at some of these other companies that have been able to achieve success indoors, I think it can move outdoors. And so that way the whole world can be a playground. And so I'm very, very excited about that company, and we recently invested in it.
That's wonderful. It ties back to where we started today's conversation, your aphorism on the importance of play.
Yes.
So kind of continuing to tie back to the beginning of today's conversation, you talked about incrementalism being a key mindset that led you early in your life to be successful and kind of gamifying your existence. What are you working on now? What are you being incremental about today?
Right now, I'm whistling. So I have realized that I've always wanted to play an instrument well. So I used to play French horn when I was younger, and I got to the point where I could be in the youth symphony, but I was never first chair. I was never a soloist. I never performed on my own. I was always sort of the backup person to first chair for harmony. And so I was like, well, I really want to play ukulele. And so I took classes, and I realized I didn't want to trim my nails. And so I was like, okay, well, is there an instrument I could take everywhere with me? So I started singing and realized that that wasn't for me either. And then I started whistling and realized, that's it. Whistling is it. So I've started whistling in the shower. I whistle. I try to find moments that were otherwise dead moments, is like what I like to call them, where you could be doing something else. So, while you're showering, you could either be very mindful while you're showering and practice mindfulness and practice being hyper present, or you could do both and learn a skill. So every day I practice my whistling in the shower, and I'm making up a song right now that I'm working on, and then I try different things where I try to go higher in range or lower in range. And so that's kind of my daily thing right now. And then the other thing is I try to ponder the nature of reality. So my obsession this year has been every day to ask a question every morning about the nature of reality. And, and it can come in many forms, which is, are my thoughts my own? Is there a collective subconscious? Is there, what is perception? How does the deer out in the yard see the world? So I ask a question like that and just kind of ruminate on it in my spare time every day. And I don't always get answers, but every now and then someone will walk up to me and they're thinking about the same thing. And like last night I went to a movie and I ran into a filmmaker who was thinking about the exact same things. And so it's really wonderful because then you can just drop in and discuss what you're both thinking about. And so I recommend that everybody, it doesn't matter what you're into, if you're into Shakespeare or, early philosophy or anything, just pick something every day and just wonder about it. Just wonder. And if you're in line at the grocery store and you've got time to kill for 5 minutes, wonder about blueberries. Wonder about, the person in front of you or why something works the way it does. Because you'll discover so much about yourself and about the world if you wonder more.
I so appreciate your kind of optimistic, curiosity-driven mindset and approach. It's a great reminder to all of us to kind of re-engage with that childlike wonder we have. So thank you for that encouragement. So as you know, FranklinCovey is a leadership company. And so we always end our interviews with the same question, which is, who is a leader that has dramatically shaped you in your journey, and what lesson did you learn from them?
So without hesitation, I would have to say Scott Weiss. So Scott Weiss was the CEO and founder of Ironport Systems and the co-founder of the company with my husband. He wasn't my husband at the time. I met him there. So he built a company where I met my husband, and and now I have beautiful children, and my life is wonderful because of that alone. But most important was I learned a lot about management and leadership from him. And I have never wanted to work harder for someone in my life. I remember seeing him for the first time and seeing the gravitas that he had when he got up in front of a group, and how he so clearly and distinctly distilled our values and kind of got us all marching in the same direction. It was a beautiful sight to behold. I went to work every day early, excited. I stayed at my desk late at night, excited. I went home on the weekend and wanted to work voluntarily. That should tell you something about his leadership. And part of it was you really felt like you were fighting for something. We had a mission, which was to eliminate spam and scammers on the internet, to get rid of malware, to get rid of viruses, and to protect, the world's greatest infrastructures and companies from these threats. And so I took that seriously, and we all did. And so every day we went to work with that same mission, that we were protecting people from these dangers and this harm. And our goal was to get to 99% efficacy in doing so that we could protect people's inboxes from these threats. And he did great things, like culturally, like we would have these, we had a very, very healthy competitive spirit. You might look at this and say this isn't healthy, but it was actually quite healthy. But every time we ripped out a competitor's product, because our products were physical, they were servers that you had to rack, we would take them outside and beat them with baseball bats. Take them to the gun range.
Like that scene from The Office.
Yeah, and then we would frame it afterwards and put it on the wall like a trophy. And we'd walk by and you'd be like, yes. But that was we were a team sport, and it just really felt like the only time that I've ever worked at a company where every little moving part was just so well run. And it's because of his leadership. Like if you had to ask him probably who influenced him the most, it probably would be probably the GM way of doing things. You can't be, you want to be first or second, but nothing else. And he just would not accept, anything less. And the hard part about it was we were a high performing team, and so we did get rid of and fire people who were bottom performers. And that was, is considered to be kind of harsh, but it helped you if you were an A plus team player to know that nobody was ever going to drag you down. Like, you're always going to be with Formula One race car drivers, right? Like, you are, and everybody was on that path. And so I think Scott Weiss and he went on to go work at Andreessen Horowitz, I think, and invested in Lyft, was on the board of Lyft, and now he's a firefighter.
Wow, fascinating.
Yeah, he's a volunteer firefighter, and a proud new dad, and I still stay in touch with him, and I still seek advice from him from time to time. And but I can't believe he's still my mentor, to be honest with you. It's just it's a privilege.
Wow, that's wonderful. Well, I'm sure he will be delighted to hear this. I hope you send it to him and express your gratitude that way.
Absolutely. I mean, he knows I've given him accolades through the years, but he knows, and I think it's still good to hear. But yeah, if anybody could ever get his ear or his advice, they'd be lucky.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been fascinating to hear your personal journey, the mindsets, the personal mindsets, the professional mindsets, the lesson learned from life, from investing. It's been a wide-ranging and fascinating conversation. So I really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you so
Wonderful.
much.
And to our guests, we hope you join us again next week for another conversation of FranklinCovey on leadership. Have a great week.